Imagine, if you will, a massive multi-billion-dollar superhighway project.
Oh, a huge infrastructure undertaking.
Exactly. You've got the civil engineers, the regional politicians, the heavy machinery moving earth by the ton.
The whole industrial works.
Right. And somewhere out in a field, a massive bulldozer is just plowing through the dirt, just clearing the path.
Unstoppable momentum.
Yeah. But right in the trajectory of those massive steel treads is a small, vibrant community.
Community completely off the radar.
Yes, completely.
Right.
Now, the driver of that bulldozer, he doesn't hate that community.
No, not at all.
He is not malicious. He doesn't have some dark, evil vendetta against the people living there.
He probably doesn't even know they exist.
That's the terrifying truth. He does not even know they're there.
Right. They are entirely invisible to him. They are operating so far below his threshold of visibility, so far removed from the boardroom where that highway was planned, that their existence doesn't even register as a data point.
It's a complete and utter mismatch of scale.
Spot on. It's pure scale blindness.
Right. And when the destruction happens, when that community is just wiped off the map, it is not a crime of passion.
Yeah.
It is a crime of scale blindness. The machinery of progress just rolls right over them.
Without even a second thought.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, if you are listening to this right now, you might be wondering why we are starting this deep dive with a bulldozer.
It's a fair question.
Usually when we think of ancient religious texts, we expect moral fables. We expect, stories about good versus evil.
Right, the classic hero's journey.
Yeah. You have the righteous king in his gleaming armor, the wicked villain plotting in the shadows, and maybe a few supernatural miracles thrown in from the heavens.
Just to make sure everyone in the audience knows who the good guy is.
Exactly. It's comforting.
It is deeply comforting. We naturally prefer our history, especially our ancient foundational texts, to be neatly categorized.
Right, into heroes and villains.
Yes, and usually heavily dusted with magic. Because it demands very little of us intellectually. A miracle, it requires awe, but it doesn't require analysis.
But then you step into the world of rigorous sociological textual analysis, and suddenly that simplistic Sunday school fairy tale lens it shatters completely.
It absolutely falls apart under scrutiny.
It really does. Because today we are wading into what is honestly one of the most fascinatingly complex diagnostic landscapes I have ever encountered.
It's incredibly dense material.
Yeah. We are looking at a highly analytical deconstruction of Surah 27 of the Quran, specifically verses 18 through 37, which is the chapter known as An-Naml.
The ant.
Right. And the sources you provided for us today are just incredible. We are drawing from a highly sophisticated 10-part audio lecture series from the Tulu Islam Digital Archives.
A phenomenal resource.
Truly. And I have to tell you, if you're listening right out of the gate, we are throwing out the conventional sentimental translations today.
They have to go.
Yeah, we are not looking at a story about a magical king talking to literal insects.
We absolutely must discard that framework. Because, if you read this specific text through the traditional medieval lens of religious sentimentality.
Like the fables.
Right. If you do that, you're actually evacuating the passage of its most brilliant, razor-sharp ideas.
You're just emptying it out.
Exactly. You take a profound masterclass in systems engineering, statecraft, and civilizational survival, and you reduce it to, a children's bedtime story.
So if you are listening right now, I want you to reset your expectations. We are not doing theology today.
No, we are doing sociology.
Yes, we are looking at the architecture of a rationally governed state. How does an ancient text provide a blueprint for lateral social intelligence?
Right.
How does it define a functioning intelligence gathering apparatus? And, how does a society survive when a superpower is literally marching toward its borders?
These are the real questions the text is asking.
Right. And to answer those questions, we have to start by exploding the biggest myth of all, the animal miracle myth.
It is the foundational misunderstanding that derails the entire passage for most readers. So let's dismantle it.
Let's do it. We are looking at the famous Valley of the Ants, or Wadi Unum.
Yes.
For centuries, conventional translations have pictured literal insects here. You have Solomon, this great historically powerful king, marching with his massive army.
Right?
And he comes across a valley filled with ants, and suddenly he hears a literal ant talking.
Which is, frankly, bizarre.
It gets weirder. Some of the older, more embellished commentaries even go so far as to describe a giant, limping queen ant issuing verbal orders to her colony.
Which, from a purely rational, empirical standpoint, is absurd. And our source material, these Tolu Islam lectures, sharply dismantles this right away
Oh,
by actually looking at the linguistics and the historical sociology of the era. The Arabic word here is Naml, and yes, in a vacuum, Naml translates to ant.
okay.
But language does not exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
If we look at the historical context of the Arabian Peninsula, Naml was the name of a historical human tribe.
The Bani Naml.
Exactly. The Bani Naml.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this and that the listener is tracking this.
Okay.
So you are saying it's just a human tribe that happened to be named after an insect?
Yes.
Is there actual historical precedence for that, or is that just a convenient way to explain away the magic?
It is incredibly common. The source points this out beautifully. I mean, naming human tribes after animals is a standard sociological practice throughout human history.
Right, across almost all indigenous and ancient cultures.
Exactly. In the classical Arabic tradition specifically, you had the Banu Asad, which literally means the tribe of the lion.
Yeah.
You had the Banu Kalb, the tribe of the dog.
Oh, that makes total sense. I mean, we still do it today, don't we?
We absolutely do.
If you look at our society, we have last names like Mr. Fox or Mr. Wolf. We name our sports teams the Bears or the Eagles.
Exactly.
We name our military units after fierce animals to, I don't know, adopt their characteristics.
Right. When a news anchor says, the Eagles crushed the Giants on Sunday, no one thinks a flock of giant mythological birds attacked a group of mythological titans.
That would be a very different sports broadcast.
It would be, but we intuitively understand it's human groups using symbolic nomenclature.
Right.
So to assume that an ancient, highly sophisticated text is suddenly talking about literal multi-legged insects rather than a human tribe bearing that name is a massive analytical failure.
It's a failure of reading comprehension.
Exactly.
And what blows my mind in the source material is that there's actual historical geography to back this up. It is not just a linguistic theory.
No, it's grounded in physical reality.
Right. The lecture references Walter Harris's book, A Journey Through the Yemen. This was an expedition in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
And Harris specifically documents the existence of a physical, geographic location called Wadi Naml, the Valley of Naml, right there in the region.
Yeah, and the source goes even further into the etymology, noting a fascinating Hebrew linguistic connection.
Oh,
The root word for Naml in ancient Hebrew traditions actually relates to a circumcised tribe.
wow.
Which strongly suggests that the Bani Naml were descendants of an Abrahamic lineage. I mean, they were a specific group of people with a distinct culture, a distinct history, living in this physical valley that Solomon's army was rapidly approaching.
Okay, so if we strip away the magic, what are we left with? I mean, if it's not a story about a magical ant, what is the text actually trying to tell us?
This is where the paradigm shift happens. Because if you think it's a story about an insect, the lesson is simply, wow, Solomon was so powerful he had supernatural hearing.
Right. It's just a miracle meant to evoke subservience and awe.
Exactly. But if you recognize that Naml is a human tribe, specifically a smaller, highly vulnerable community facing the sudden advance of a massive imperial army,
Right.
suddenly you are looking at a profound treatise on lateral social intelligence.
Let's dig into that action. Because in verse 18, the leader of this Naml tribe, a queen, by the way,
Which the source notes points to a functioning matriarchal, or at least female-led, societal structure in that specific region.
right, which is fascinating in itself. So this queen sees Solomon's massive forces approaching, and she issues a warning to her people.
Yes.
She says, and I'm quoting the translation here, O Naml, enter your dwellings.
Right.
I want to pause here, because if you are listening, I want you to really picture this moment. An overwhelming military force is on the horizon. Dust is kicking up into the sky. The ground is literally shaking.
A terrifying scenario.
Absolutely. And what does the leader of this vulnerable community do? She does not fall to her knees and pray for a supernatural shield.
No.
She doesn't run to a temple to perform some mystical ritual or, I don't know, offer a sacrifice to appease the gods of war.
No, she doesn't do any of that.
Yeah.
She performs the most rigorously rational act described by any leader facing an existential crisis.
Which is?
She executes a highly efficient social protection protocol. She bases this on accurate, immediate situational awareness.
It's a modern emergency broadcast system.
Exactly.
Think about how we handle crises today. If a tornado is spotted on radar, or if a tsunami warning buoy is triggered, the civil defense sirens go off.
Right, your phone buzzes.
Our phones buzz with a severe alert. Seek shelter immediately. Go indoors.
Yep.
That is what the Quran is describing here. It is describing lateral social intelligence.
Exactly. This warning system protects the community, not because some king sitting on a throne 1,000 miles away decreed it, but because one node in the community,
The queen.
right, the queen, she identified a localized threat and instantly passed that data horizontally to everyone else. Enter your dwellings.
It's peer-to-peer data transmission for survival.
Yes. And this brings us to what I believe is one of the most intellectually sharp linguistic details in the entire text.
Let's hear it.
When the An-Naml queen warns her people, she explains why they need to hide. She says, "Lest Solomon and his hosts crush you, la yashum."
La yashurun. That phrase is the crux of the whole scene.
He really is.
Without perceiving, unawares.
Aware, yes. And if we connect this to the broader sociology of power, this is where the text absolutely shines. Notice what she does not say.
Right.
The threat to the An-Naml tribe isn't that Solomon's advancing army is intrinsically evil. She doesn't shout, hide, for the wicked, bloodthirsty conquerors are coming to slaughter us all.
Right. She does not assign malice to them.
Exactly. She assigns scale to them. She says they might crush us without even realizing they are doing it. Liashuan.
Wow.
The threat is that the army operates at such a massive, macro-level scale that the smaller tribe is simply below their operational threshold of visibility.
Which takes us right back to my bulldozer analogy at the very beginning of the deep dive.
It perfectly maps onto it.
The bulldozer driver isn't evil, the machine is just too big, and the community is too small to be seen from the cab.
Precisely. This is a surgically precise, timeless description of how large-scale institutions destroy small social units. It is almost never through intentional malice. It is through scale blindness. I mean, the decision makers are so far removed from the ground-level reality that the destruction is just a byproduct of their momentum.
That is such a heavy, resonant concept, scale blindness. I mean, if you look at the modern world, you see this happening every single day.
Oh, everywhere.
Think about multinational corporations moving into a developing nation to extract minerals or timber.
Right.
They completely displace local indigenous communities. They destroy their watersheds, uproot their entire way of life.
Just utter devastation.
But the board of directors sitting in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan or London, they aren't sitting there twirling their mustaches, plotting the demise of a small fishing village.
No, they're looking at a spreadsheet.
Exactly. They're optimizing for quarterly profit. The village is crushed, la yashurun, without the corporation even perceiving the human cost of their algorithmic efficiency.
Or consider algorithmic decision-making itself. I mean, that runs our modern lives.
Oh, absolutely.
A massive tech platform updates its algorithm to optimize user engagement. It's a tiny tweak in the code. But overnight, thousands of small independent businesses that relied on the old system to reach their customers suddenly go bankrupt.
Their traffic just drops to zero.
Yes. And the algorithm didn't target them maliciously. It didn't hate them. It was just scale blind.
It couldn't perceive the granular destruction it was causing.
Right. The text of Surah 27 is giving us a permanent warning about the inherent danger of unchecked, massive institutional power.
Okay, so if I follow that logic, the text isn't necessarily anti-Solomon here.
Not at all.
It's just stating a physical law of sociology. Big things crush small things if they don't have systems in place to see them.
Exactly. And that is the perfect segue into the next crucial part of the analysis.
Yeah.
Because Solomon, the guy driving the proverbial bulldozer.
Right, the commander of this massive institutional machine.
Yes. He actually hears this warning.
Right, and this completely flips the script on how ancient empires usually operate.
It really does.
Let's look at the architecture of Solomon's power. Because to understand how he hears this warning, we have to demystify who is actually marching in this army.
Yes, we have to ground the military in reality.
Because again, the fairy tale interpretation says he's marching with a menagerie of ghosts, goblins, and literal birds flying in tactical formation above him.
Yeah, the traditional translation says his army was composed of jinn and birds, or tayr in Arabic.
Right.
And again, if we apply the methodology of the Tulu Islam lectures, we have to ground this in historical and linguistic reality.
Okay, so what are the jinn?
Well, in classical Arabic linguistics, before medieval folklore corrupted the terms, jinn comes from a root word, meaning to be hidden, to be concealed, or to operate out of sight.
Okay, so not a blue genie popping out of a brass lamp to grant 3 wishes.
No, definitely not. Historically, in the context of ancient Arabian armies, this referred to the fierce nomadic Bedouin tribes of the deep mountains.
Oh, wait.
These were people who lived off the grid, hidden from the urban centers. It also referred to specialized technologists, blacksmiths, and craftsmen who worked in secluded, guarded areas because their skills were military secrets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these were tough, wild, highly capable human groups that formed the vanguard or the specialized auxiliary units of a massive military force.
So if we were to translate that into modern military terms, the Jinn were essentially the special forces.
Yes.
They were the shock troops who operated covertly, or the combat engineers who built the siege engines out of sight.
Exactly. And what about the birds that tear?
Right, what are the birds?
In the military terminology of the ancient Near East, and frankly, even up to a century or two ago, birds meant the fast cavalry.
Oh, that makes sense.
It was the reconnaissance units, the intelligence scouts on the fastest horses.
I mean, we literally still do this today.
We do.
We call our aerial military branches the Air Force, and we call the people flying the jets airmen. If an archaeologist 2,000 years from now dug up a document saying, the 101st Airborne rained fire down on the enemy, and they concluded that the Americans had an army of mutant humans who could literally fly,
They'd be completely missing the point.
they would look ridiculous. We use airborne to describe a method of deployment.
Precisely. You don't assume the pilots have actual feathers.
Right.
So what the text is actually describing is that Solomon has this highly organized, massively powerful, complex human military apparatus.
He's got the fierce, unconventional mountain infantry, the Jinn.
Yes.
He's got the fast reconnaissance cavalry, the Tear.
Exactly. And crucially, verse 17 says they were all kept in strict military discipline. The Arabic word used is yuzan.
Yuzan. The source puts a lot of weight on that word. What does it literally mean?
It means they were kept in ranks,
Mm-hmm.
kept within strict bounds.
Okay.
It implies a system where even the most fiercely independent, wild elements of the army, those mountain tribes, were almost chained to the law of the state.
They couldn't just do whatever they wanted.
Exactly. They were not allowed to pillage or operate autonomously. It was a highly disciplined, rational military structure.
Okay, so this massive, disciplined military machine is bearing down on the Valley of An-Naml.
Right.
The queen issues her lateral warning, hide, so they don't crush us unawares.
Yes.
And verse 19 says that Solomon hears her, and he smiles at her speech.
Yeah, that reaction is key.
Now wait, let's look at the wording there. He smiles at her speech. The Arabic is qala,
Right.
and he thanks God for the blessing of understanding the mantique altair.
Yes. Mantique. This is perhaps the most important conceptual word in this section.
The source emphasizes this heavily, so let's unpack mantic. What does he actually understand here?
Mantique has the exact same root as the word for logic in the classical Arabic philosophical tradition.
Logic.
Yes. It means rational speech. It means coherent, logical discourse.
Okay.
When the Quran says Solomon understands the mantique, it is forcefully stating that he isn't performing a magical Dr. Dolittle trick where he chats with animals. His true miracle, the actual marvel of his governance structure, is his systemic capacity to receive information from the absolute smallest, most marginalized, most vulnerable social unit in his operational environment.
And to treat that information as rational data.
Yes. He doesn't dismiss it as noise.
I love that distinction, treating it as data, not noise.
It's vital.
If you are listening to this, think about the leadership structures you interact with.
Yeah, consider your local government.
Right. Think about a local city council or the executives at a massive corporation. If they received a distress call or a warning from the poorest, most marginalized community in their jurisdiction, the people at the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, how would they react?
Most leaders today would just dismiss it as noise.
Completely. They'd say, oh, they're just complaining again.
Or, that's just the cost of doing business.
Exactly. Or, more likely, they wouldn't even have the feedback loop set up to hear the warning in the first place.
Right. The emails would bounce back.
Yeah.
The petitions would go straight into a shredder. You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, most systems of power are explicitly designed to filter out the voices of the vulnerable.
Insulate the top from the bottom.
Exactly. Bureaucracies are designed to insulate leadership from the granular distress of the people at the bottom.
So Solomon's system is extraordinary, not because of magic, but because the flow of information is unimpeded.
Yes. He actually hears the distress call of the An-Naml queen. He processes the logic of it. He understands her mantic.
He realizes, my army is currently a scale-blind threat to this community.
Right. And he alters his course. He smiles, not with the arrogant smirk of a conqueror, but with the profound satisfaction of a leader recognizing that his lateral warning systems are actually functioning.
That is incredible. But hold on. I need to push back on this a little bit.
Oh, for it.
Because immediately following this event, Solomon prays.
He does.
He says, "My Lord, enable me to be grateful for your favor and to do righteous deeds of which you approve." Now, if we are stripping away the religious sentimentality and calling this a purely rational, sociological text,
Which we are.
does the fact that he immediately drops to his knees and prays contradict the whole empirical statecraft angle?
I can see why you'd think that.
It just sounds to me like a standard, ego-driven king stroking his own ego under the guise of religious piety. Like, "Oh, thank you, God, for making me so smart and powerful."
That is a very fair critique. And it's exactly why the Totally Islam lectures spend so much time analyzing the specific vocabulary of this prayer.
Okay.
Because if you read it superficially, it does sound like standard piety. But Solomon doesn't just offer empty praise. He asks for something very specific, using a very specific conceptual route.
What does he ask for?
He asks God to help him keep his own massive forces within limits. And the conceptual root of his prayer ties directly back to that word we just discussed.
Yuza. Wait, the same word used for disciplining the wild mountain tribes. Yuza.
Exactly the same root concept. Yeah. He is applying the concept of yun systemic limitation, strict discipline, being bound by law to his own unchecked executive power.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Think about the psychology of this moment. Here is a leader looking at the staggering, earth-shaking might of his own state apparatus.
He just saw how easily he could have accidentally wiped out an entire civilization simply by walking over them.
Right. And he realizes, if I don't bind myself to higher, objective, rational laws, I will inevitably become a tyrant.
The momentum of his own power will destroy him.
When everyone around him, he is actively seeking systemic alignment.
Okay, that makes sense, but it requires a completely different understanding of what God means in this context.
It fundamentally changes the definition.
Because the source material spends a massive amount of time on this paradigm shift.
Yep.
If we are stripping away the fairy tale, we also have to strip away the Sunday school image of God.
Yep.
You know, the image of God as this angry, moody dictator sitting on a literal physical throne in the clouds, tossing lightning bolts down when he's mad and handing out candy when you flatter him with enough prayers.
Absolutely. The Totally Islam perspective makes this exceedingly clear. To please God, the Arabic phrase is, Radi Allah does not mean flattering a moody, anthropomorphic deity.
Right.
In this analytical framework, God is the embodiment of the immutable, rational, objective laws of the universe.
Okay.
To please God means to align one's actions, and the actions of the state, with those universal laws of sustenance and balance. It means maintaining the proportion, the equity, and the husnan, the beauty and balance of society.
So it's like gravity.
Exactly like gravity.
You don't flater gravity to keep from falling off a cliff.
No, you don't.
You don't write a poem to gravity hoping it will spare you if you jump.
That won't save you.
You survive by aligning your physical actions with the objective reality of gravity.
Right.
So when Solomon prays, he is essentially recalibrating his state. He is asking for the continued intellectual and systemic capacity to align his massive military machinery with the objective, rational laws of societal health.
So that his power remains a force for order rather than a bulldozer of destruction.
That is a perfect analogy. And maintaining that systemic alignment, avoiding that destructive scale blindness, it requires one thing above all else.
It requires relentlessly accurate data.
Which brings us perfectly to the next phase of the text, verses 20 through 27, where we see exactly how Solomon gathers that data.
Yes. Because you can't align your state with reality if your map of reality is completely wrong.
Right. A perfectly calibrated steering wheel is useless if the GPS is lying to you.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the tyranny of unproven assertions and the introduction of the hoopoe or the hoo-hooed.
Once again, our first task is to discard the imagery of a literal bird.
Right. I mean, the text says Solomon is conducting a strict military inspection of his forces, and he notices that the hoot-hoot is missing. Are we honestly supposed to believe that a brilliant military commander managing tens of thousands of specialized troops halts his entire operation, throws a fit, and threatens lethal punishment because one specific pigeon happened to fly away from the camp?
Makes no sense.
No. Hoot-hoot is a human scout. He is the head of the intelligence apparatus.
Right. It's a title, a code name, or a tribal designation, just like we discussed earlier with the Jinn and the Tear.
It's Chief, Falcon, or Agent Hoopoe.
Precisely. And notice Solomon's reaction to the absence of his intelligence chief. He doesn't just shrug it off.
What does he do?
He says, Why do I not see the Hudhud? I will surely punish him with a severe punishment or slaughter him unless he brings me a clear authorization.
It shows absolute ruthless accountability.
It does.
Nobody is above the system, not even the top spies. You break military protocol, you face the music.
But when the Hudhud finally returns, the justification he brings for his absence is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
In verse 22, he says to Solomon, I have encompassed what you have not encompassed, and I brought you from Saba certain news.
Certain news.
Yes. The Arabic phrase he uses for certain news is naba yakin.
Naba yakin. Let's linger on that for a second.
It's vital.
Verified intelligence. Hard empirical data.
This is a crucial defining distinction in statecraft. Think about a typical imperial court in the ancient world, or even a toxic corporate boardroom today.
Okay.
What does a courtier or a middle manager usually do?
Oh, they bring rumors, they bring speculation.
Right.
They bring whatever narrative they think will flatter the CEO or the king and advance their own career.
They tell the boss exactly what the boss wants to hear.
Yeah. Oh, great king, the neighboring lands are weak. Their people are crying out for your glorious rule. Our product launch is going perfectly. Ignore the bad reviews.
Exactly. It's an information environment poisoned by sycophancy.
But Solomon's intelligence network does not operate on sycophancy.
No, it operates on mantic, on logic, and fact.
The Hudhud brings raw, unvarnished, empirically verified data.
He was not asked to distort the intelligence to make it more palatable for the king's ego. He basically walks in and says, I found something you completely missed, boss.
And Solomon accepts it?
He does.
So what is this verified intelligence? The Hudhud reports on the land of Saba, known historically as Sheba in southern Arabia.
Yes.
He says he found a woman ruling over them, Queen Bilqis.
Right.
He reports that she has been given everything, massive resources, and that she possesses a magnificent throne, an Arshazim.
An Arshazim, yeah.
Now, our source breaks this down too, and we have to clarify this because, again, the medieval commentaries go absolutely wild here.
The mythology is intense.
If you read the old texts, they describe a literal physical chair made of solid gold and studded with diamonds, standing 50 feet high, guarded by mechanical, magical lions that roar when you step on the stairs.
It is a complete fanciful distraction from the sociological reality the Quran is trying to convey.
So what does Arsh actually mean?
In Arabic, the word arsh can refer to a physical chair or throne, yes. But in the context of statecraft and political sociology, it means central control, sovereignty, or governance architecture.
Oh, like when we say someone seized the throne today in a coup.
Exactly.
We don't mean they literally broke into the palace and stole a piece of antique furniture.
Right.
We mean they took over the central authority. Or when we say the Crown passed a new tax law in the UK, a piece of metal with jewels in it didn't write a law. The crown is the architecture of the state.
Exactly. So what is the intelligence report actually saying?
Right. What's the translation?
The Hudhud is reporting. Saba has a highly functioning, formidable power structure. They have real resources, a real economy, a solid central command. They are a peer competitor.
Okay, so they're strong.
But, and here is the critical flaw in their society, the Hudhud reports in verse 24 that the people of Saba and their queen prostrate to the sun instead of God.
Okay, let's unpack this sun worship aspect.
It's really misunderstood.
Because the obvious superficial religious reading is just, oh, they are pagans who worship a big ball of fire in the sky, so they're bad, and Solomon has to go convert them.
Right, the traditional crusade narrative.
But the Tolu'i Islam source insists this is a deeply sociological critique, not just a theological dispute about which temple you pray in.
The critique is entirely about misaligned governance.
How so?
Let's think about the nature of the sun. The sun is a purely physical, entirely predictable, mechanical phenomenon.
Right. It rises in the east, it sets in the west.
It radiates heat, but it has no moral agency. It does not care about justice, it does not care about equity, and it certainly does not care about the suffering of the vulnerable.
It's just burning gas.
Exactly. So if a society directs its systemic accountability, its highest reverence, its sujud or prostration toward a purely physical phenomenon rather than a higher, rational, moral principle,
Then what happens?
that society's feedback loop is fundamentally broken.
I want to make sure I really grasp this because it feels incredibly relevant. It's like, imagine a highly productive, massive modern corporation.
Okay, let's look at a modern corporation.
They have incredible resources, a brilliant CEO, a massive arshazim, a huge, sprawling global headquarters.
Right. Immense power.
But their only metric for success, the sun they worship every single morning when the market opens, is the stock ticker,
Ah,
the quarterly earnings report. That is their ultimate reality. If that number goes up, they cheer and celebrate. If that number goes down, they panic and fire thousands of people.
that is a flawless modern analogy.
Really?
Yes. The stock ticker is a predictable, mechanical output of market forces. It has zero moral compass. It doesn't care if your product is curing cancer or poisoning rivers.
Right.
If a corporation's ultimate accountability mechanism is pointed solely at that ticker, they will inevitably engage in destructive behavior.
Because there's no moral check.
Exactly. They will pollute those rivers, they will exploit their workers, and they will crush local communities like Ashurun unawares because their system is fundamentally misaligned.
They are a powerful engine, but they are worshiping the wrong reference point.
Precisely.
If you're listening, think about the industry you work in. What is the sun your company worships? Is it engagement metrics? Is it click-through rates?
Or pure algorithmic growth.
Yeah. Is it purely GDP at a national level?
Yeah.
If your only metric is GDP, you might have a booming economy while half your population lives in abject poverty.
Exactly.
So the Hudhud is delivering a highly sophisticated intelligence assessment. Saba is strong, but their systemic accountability is pointed at the physical world rather than universal laws of justice and reason.
They have a massive engine, but the steering wheel is locked onto a mirage.
Yeah, Satan, which the source defines as rebellious, self-serving desires, has made their deeds seem pleasing to them.
Right.
They think they're doing great because the sun is shining, but they are heading for systemic collapse.
Precisely. And that diagnosis sets the stage for Solomon's response.
Because how does a rationally governed state deal with a misaligned superpower on its borders?
This is one of the most profoundly misunderstood aspects of the entire text.
Let's get into it, because Solomon decides to write a letter to Queen Bilqis of Saba.
He does.
And the opening of this letter, found in verse 30, contains one of the most famous phrases in the entire world, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Yes.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, as it is almost universally translated.
That's a standard translation, yeah.
But the source material gives us a completely different, deeply biological and radically sociological breakdown of this phrase.
It's paradigm shift.
When I read this part of the lecture, it completely changed how I view statecraft.
Yes. To truly understand this phrase, we have to look past the religious incantation and look at the classical Arabic root for those words, Rahman and Rahim.
Okay, what is the root?
They both stem from the root, Ram. And Ram quite literally means womb.
The womb of a mother.
Yes, the womb.
Let's really expand on this biological analogy, because it is staggering. Think about the function of a mother's womb in biology.
What does it do?
It is the ultimate environment of absolute unconditional nourishment. A womb supplies oxygen, calcium, blood, warmth, and total protection to the developing fetus.
It anticipates every need of the growing life inside it.
Right. And crucially, it does all of this without ever demanding an invoice.
No contracts.
It doesn't draw up a contract. It doesn't expect verbal gratitude from the fetus. It doesn't say, I gave you extra calcium today, so you owe me.
It simply provides what is necessary for growth, development, and actualization, entirely unconditionally.
It is the ultimate, flawless social safety net.
It really is.
As you were explaining that, I kept thinking, the womb doesn't say, well, you didn't work hard enough today, fetus. You didn't meet your KPI, so I'm cutting off your oxygen supply.
It nourishes based purely on the need for growth.
Exactly.
Now project that profound biological reality onto the concept of macro-level statecraft. When Solomon opens his diplomatic letter with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he is not just reciting a polite religious greeting before getting down to business.
What is he doing?
He is openly declaring the foundational operational principle of his governance architecture.
Wow.
He is communicating to Bilqis, I operate a state that functions like a ROM. We provide for the development, security, and nourishment of our people unconditionally.
That's incredible.
We do not extract from our citizens like parasites. We nourish them like a womb. We align our state with the universal divine law of unconditional growth.
He is flexing his operating system.
Exactly.
He's not bragging about how many chariots he has. He's saying, my state is an engine of human flourishing.
Yes.
And then comes the core demand of the letter in verse 31. He writes to Bilqis, do not exalt yourselves against me and come to me in submission.
The Arabic word used is Muslim.
Now, I have to stop you again here.
Sure.
Because when a modern listener hears a powerful king say, "Come to me in submission," alarm bells instantly go off.
I completely understand why.
It sounds exactly like forced religious conversion or classic brutal imperial conquest. Bow down to my God and submit to my rule, or I will destroy you.
Right.
How does that fit into this idea of a rational, benevolent state?
It's a completely understandable reaction based on how history is usually taught. But again, that is a superficial, culturally conditioned reading.
Okay, so what's the actual logic?
The logic operating in this letter is purely consequentialist. It is based on the Quranic concept of the law of requital, or mukafat-e-amal.
The law of requital. What does that mean, practically speaking, for a nation state?
It is the sociological equivalent of Newton's third law of motion.
Every action has a reaction.
Exactly. It means that actions have inevitable logical consequences.
Okay.
The submission being Muslim that Solomon is requesting is not about forcing Bilqis to change her personal, private religious beliefs at the point of a sword.
It's not a religious crusade.
No. He is inviting her to integrate her nation into a governance architecture that empirically produces better outcomes for human beings. He is essentially saying, your current system, which worships predictable, amoral physical phenomena like the sun, will eventually lead to societal decay.
Because it's a broken feedback loop.
Exactly. It is mathematically destined to fail because it is misaligned with the laws of human flourishing. My system is aligned with those rational laws, the Ram.
The womb.
Right. Do not let your ego destroy your people. Integrate your systems with ours. Submit to these universal principles because our architecture actually works.
Wow. Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking.
Let's hear it.
It's less like a medieval crusade demanding you kiss the ring, and much more like a lead developer of an open source software project reaching out to another company.
Yes, exactly.
He's saying, hey, we looked at your code. Your operating system has a fatal bug in its core logic.
The sun worship.
Right. It looks like it's running fine now, but it's going to crash and take all your users down with it. We have built a stable, life-giving, bug-free architecture.
Put your pride aside.
Yeah, put your pride aside and migrate your systems over to our architecture for your own survival.
That is exactly the dynamic. And we know for a fact that this is a diplomatic, rational exchange of ideas rather than a brutish threat because of how Queen Bilqis reacts.
Right.
This is a pivotal moment in the text that demonstrates the immense intellectual parity between these two leaders.
Let's talk about her reaction, because Bilqis receives this letter and she doesn't panic.
No.
She doesn't dissolve into tears, but she also doesn't immediately surrender or blindly go to war.
She's highly analytical.
In verse 32, she convenes her council. She exercises democratic consultation. She says, "O eminent ones, advise me in my affair. I would not decide a matter until you witness it."
Very rational leadership.
And her military advisors, her generals, they do exactly what generals have done since the dawn of time. They flex their muscle.
Naturally.
They reply, "We are men of strength and of great military might, but the command is yours, so see what you will command."
It is a classic hawkish response. We have the guns, Queen. Just give the word and we will march.
Which raises a fascinating historical question. Why doesn't she just attack?
Right.
As the Hudhud's intelligence report confirmed, she has a massive economy. She has a strong, highly equipped military. She has central command.
She's a superpower.
She could easily plunge the entire region into a devastating, protracted war and possibly win.
But she doesn't.
Why not?
Because she possesses deep empirical historical wisdom.
She looks at her eager generals and she delivers a line that honestly gave me chills when I read the analysis.
This is a profound statement.
She says in verse 34, "Indeed, kings, when they enter a city, ruin it and make the most honored of its people its lowest."
She knows history.
She has empirical data on how imperialism actually functions on the ground.
Exactly. She deeply understands the law of requital operating through the friction of military conquest.
Okay.
She knows that force-based integration, even if you win the war, destroys the very productive capacity you are claiming to capture.
Think about it logically. If a king invades a neighboring country to take its wealth, the war itself bombs the infrastructure.
Right. It slaughters the workers, burns the fields, and humbles the innovators. The wealth you wanted to capture evaporates into the friction of the conquest.
Exactly. She knows that standard imperialism is a lose-lose scenario that ultimately impoverishes everyone involved.
She realizes that going to war is just throwing her people into a meat grinder, so she decides to run a strategic test on Solomon instead.
A very calculated move.
She says, I will send to them a gift and see with what reply the messenger's return.
Yes.
This is brilliant. If you look at this through the systems engineering lens, this is the scientific method applied directly to high-stakes statecraft.
It is an empirical test.
She is poking the black box to see what output it generates.
Precisely. She
Yep.
formulates a hypothesis.
Which is?
Solomon is just a standard run-of-the-mill imperialist king. He might use fancy words about the ROM, but deep down, he just wants my gold.
If that hypothesis is true, he is driven by the accumulation of capital.
Mm.
Therefore, if she sends him a massive amount of capital, essentially a colossal bribe, disguised as a diplomatic gift, he will be appeased.
He'll take the money, add it to his treasury, and leave her kingdom alone.
Exactly.
She's asking, are you actually operating a state based on universal rational laws, this ROM concept of unconditional nourishment, or are you just a typical geopolitical mob boss running a protection racket?
Yeah, it's exactly the question.
Because if he takes the gold, he's just a mob boss. He can be bought. His divine system has a price tag.
And how does Solomon respond to this massive influx of capital?
He rejects it outright.
Flat out.
The text says in verse 36, when her emissaries arrive with the treasure, he tells them, "Do you provide me with wealth? But what God has given me is better than what he has given you. Rather, it is you who rejoice in your gift."
Basically, keep your money.
He literally tells them to pack it up and take it back. He absolutely refuses to compromise his rational governance architecture for a pile of gold.
Which serves as the ultimate undeniable proof of his system's integrity.
He passes the test.
He essentially tells her emissaries, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of my state. You are trying to buy off the immutable laws of the universe.
It doesn't work that way.
No. My state isn't built on the primitive accumulation of capital. It's built on structural integrity. You cannot bribe gravity, and you cannot bribe a rationally governed state.
And that flat rejection is the final piece of data Bilquis needs. Her experiment yielded a clear result.
It proved her initial hypothesis wrong.
Right. She realizes he's not an imperialist mob boss. He actually possesses a superior civilizational code.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. We've gone through this incredible, sweeping narrative arc from verse 18 all the way to 37.
It's been quite a journey.
And we need to tie these distinct nodes together because the source material argues that this is not a collection of random stories, but a single, cohesive, systemic argument.
Let's review the three primary nodes we've seen operating with independent rational agency within this massive information environment.
Node 1, the ant, the queen of the An-Naml.
Right.
She represents the absolute grassroots, the lateral intelligence of the vulnerable. She protects her community by issuing accurate, immediate warnings about scale-blind threats.
She doesn't appeal to magic. She uses situational awareness to keep her people alive.
Node 2, the hoopoe, the hudhud, the intelligence apparatus.
Yeah.
He gathers and delivers verifiable, hard, empirical intelligence, nabayakin, flowing upward to the executive leadership.
And he does it without distorting the data to make it more palatable or flattering for the king.
And Node 3, the queen of Saba, Bilquis, the executive processor on the other side of the border.
The peer competitor.
She receives incoming diplomatic communication. She consults her council democratically rather than acting like an autocrat. She relies on empirical, historical knowledge about the futility of imperialism.
And she physically tests her assumptions with an experiment before committing her entire state into an irreversible course of action.
When you look at these three distinct nodes operating together, you see the permanent ideal architecture of a rationally governed state.
The ultimate lesson the Quran is imparting here is that a successful, enduring society is not one where the ruler relies on supernatural miracles, dictatorial whims, or brute force.
That is the comforting fairy tale we had to discard at the beginning of this hour.
Because the reality is so much more demanding of us.
It is incredibly demanding.
The reality presented here is an environment where every node in the social network, from the smallest, poorest community standing in the path of the bulldozer, to the chief of military intelligence, all the way to the foreign head of state, is empowered to gather, transmit, and act on accurate information.
That is the evolutionary upgrade. That is the secret to Solomon's power. His system thrives. It dominates the ancient world, frankly, because it completely lacks an information suppression mechanism.
Exactly.
His ego doesn't prevent him from hearing the distress call of the An-Naml queen. His royal court doesn't prevent the hudhud from delivering uncomfortable, terrifying truths about a rival superpower.
The data flows freely.
And Bilquis, witnessing this complete systemic integrity, recognizes the clear superiority of this architecture over her own misaligned sun-worshipping system.
She prepares to upgrade her civilizational code. She submits to the better system.
The actors change across history, the kings and queens die, the empires turn to dust.
But the permanent principle remains. Social intelligence must flow freely upward and horizontally, and it must be processed by a leadership that actually possesses the mantic, the logic, and the humility to receive it and act on it.
Wow, we have covered some serious dense ground today.
We really have.
To summarize the journey we just took, we started with a text that is almost universally globally traded as a cute children's story about a magical king talking to animals. And by stripping away the sentimentality, removing the magic, and applying the rigorous sociological and linguistic analysis from the Tului Islam lectures, we discovered a razor-sharp, highly sophisticated treatise on statecraft.
It's a completely different text now.
We saw how scale blindness, the sheer momentum of massive institutions, threatens vulnerable communities. We saw the critical difference between sycophancy and verified intelligence in a boardroom or a throne room.
Yeah.
We saw the existential dangers of pointing our systemic feedback loops at predictable, amoral metrics like a stock ticker or the sun.
And we saw the unparalleled power of a governance architecture that provides for its people unconditionally.
Like a ROM, like a womb, rather than extracting from them like a parasite.
It really is a timeless masterclass in civilizational survival. The text is urgently urging us to move beyond unproven assertions, beyond superstition, and to build systems rooted in reason, empirical reality, and unconditional nourishment.
Which brings me right back to that bulldozer plowing the superhighway at the start of our deep dive.
Ah, yes, the bulldozer.
If you are listening to this right now, look at the massive institutions that govern your life. Look at your local government, your federal government, the tech monopolies that control your data, the multinational corporations that employ you.
Look closely at them.
Are their feedback loops pointed at the right sun? Or are they just worshiping the quarterly stock ticker, completely scale blind to the destruction in their path?
It is arguably the defining challenge of our modern era. We have built the biggest bulldozers in human history, but we have destroyed our lateral warning systems.
Exactly. And more importantly, I want you to ask yourself, if the smallest, most vulnerable members of your society, the marginalized communities standing right in the path of the machine, tried to send a lateral warning about being crushed unawares, do the leaders today possess the mantic, the systemic capacity, and the humility to actually hear them?
Or is the radio turned off?
That is something for all of us to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.